Nailed it. Yeah, everybody's week was good. Coming in just full of gratitude for all the
we're here.
yeah, exactly. Thankful to be here. All right, so let me tell you. All right, a few quick housekeeping things again. If you weren't here last week, next week we are going to have dinner at our house starting at 5. So same, and I'll send you an email this week. Lauren has divided everybody up to bring something, and so we'll put that in the email. And then we're going to take care of, like, we're going to have some ham and turkey because it's Christmas time. That's what you're supposed to have. Ham and turkey. And so then childcare will be at Leslie's house. And so if you need childcare, will you just let me know if you have multiple kids, how many kids are coming, just all that. We've got a couple of babysitters that babysit for us normally. So yeah, and then so we'll kind of put a bow on it next week, and then I'll send out the assessment again on Monday for you guys just to take and see what you fill in. And I guess if you want, when I have all the results tallied and everything, if you want yours, you can be like, hey, send mine and see. Let me know how much I dive into this stuff and whatever. So your closet Christian nationalist or not even closeted, maybe just full on. And so then we'll be done through then. So kind of my schedule is so then in December and January, get all the research, put it all together, and then have to write it all up. This is an easy part because I don't have, before you have to come up with content and have to write it. This is just, hey, here's what the research showed. Here's what we did. Here's what the research showed. Here's, the results of the research. And so that's all. I have to just put it all in, the correct format. So then hopefully would defend it in like February, and then I would graduate in May. So we'll keep you up to date. We see all you guys all the time, so you guys will know. So tonight we're gonna do the same thing. We'll talk about, I don't know if anybody was able to get to any of the experiences this week, or it could be an experience that we had with your family. That would have been fun. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll spend some time. We've got 2 questions for us to banter around, and then we'll get out of here. All right? Let me pray for us, and we will start. Jesus, we thank you for today. Thank you for the week that we had, to remind us to be grateful for all the things that you've given us, even if there were, fun family tension that happened, that we can still find ways to be grateful in the midst of that. So would you just be with us during this time tonight? Help us to have fruitful conversations and challenging conversations to learn what it's like to be more like you. And it's through Christ we pray. Amen. All right, anybody have anything they want to share from this week? Anybody get to do anything? Or
I sent you a text, you didn't respond to.
Correct, we were in Mississippi.
No excuses.
Sorry, man. So you went.
So we went to the Plaza Del
Mariachi.
Yeah, they were good. And it's a great neat spot with all kinds of different restaurants and different things. And
y'all went during the day, right? Was that what you told me?
So one of the neat things was I ran into one of the guys. He owned one of the restaurants, and he was telling me I didn't want to get food from him. I wanted to go to another place that had a really high rating, but because he talked my face off, it was like, I gotta get food from you. But it was great. Had a great conversation. He was telling me, because you got to come at night. It's lively. Like, you'll love the music. And a neat thing that I found was they actually have Sunday service there on the stage on Sunday mornings. So they have a church, but it was a different experience just from the standpoint of my family was the only white family in there. Everybody else was of Spanish descent, and it was a neat experience. And they were very welcoming and opening and having conversations and talking with me. And we had a great time. It was a neat experience. I told Ryan, we hadn't got to do an experience, and I was like, I'm doing an experience. I'm gonna text Al about it. Hopefully, we'll have some dialogue.
No.
And I didn't get it, which is par for the course, so
To
that's
be,
the last time
to
I
be
did
fair,
it.
we were in the middle of nowhere. Mississippi. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the coverage was probably spotty.
And
I just got like half
yeah.
a text and then.
Yeah, in all seriousness, as I don't wanna give you a hard time.
Yeah.
It was great, neat experience, I'm glad that we did it because we, like I said, we got to, like the menu was basically in Spanish and trying to figure out what everything was, and we got Spanish food and it was good.
Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed it, others did not, but I enjoyed it. It was good.
That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, matter, what matters.
you
Exactly.
enjoy.
Because everybody knows it's about me.
It is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Alan, we didn't necessarily go on the experience, but something that just coming off Thanksgiving that we were talking about it. I don't know if this counts within like maybe an uncharted territory,
Yeah.
if you will, of how we spent Thanksgiving. Maybe three years ago. I work with in a data science group, and there's a lot of diversity, a lot of Indian kind of men and women. And we got invited to a Thanksgiving at their house that they were hosting for, the population of people there is, a lot of folks that are on, visas or work sponsorships, and they don't have a lot of family. So somebody hosting a Thanksgiving is really meaningful because they have a place to go.
Yeah.
And so they've kind of built networks within each other, not knowing each other except for work, and so we all went. My family got invited. We were the only ones, only white family, but then with kids. Everybody else, nobody had kids, and so they
were so excited for us to bring our kids. It was fun.
They asked for us to bring our kids. There was actually one other family. There was a Chinese family that brought their 2 kids, and so it was really crazy with like the food setup that they had brought in, like turkey and some kind of Americanized food just for us because they were hosting and they wanted it to be comfortable.
And everybody else is vegetarian or vegan.
Right.
So most of those cultures don't eat meat at all or anything with meat product.
But everything else was.
That's tricky on
I was
Thanksgiving.
gonna say, how can you
Yeah.
do Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
But it was a really crazy experience that we had for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And so just the time, period, one day.
That's great.
It was really, the kids loved it. They thought it was awesome. And,
Yeah.
they were kind of getting questions from all of the people there. So.
It was one of the coolest family experiences I think we've had. That like unexpected, because I don't know that I've ever felt so like. I mean, they wanted to know everything about an American Thanksgiving. They were so curious, and they asked so many questions, and they, it's like they went to this woman who was hosting it. I think she went to Whole Foods, and she was like, if it says Thanksgiving, I'll buy it because I don't even know.
Yeah.
And she was so excited, and her enthusiasm for something that you kind of take for granted was almost contagious.
Yeah.
And she showed the kids around her house, and she had picked up toys from a neighbor so that they had something to do, and our kids brought some games, and so they're like sitting around with these young, a lot of them didn't speak very good English, but they could all play Uno. So
Yeah.
it's really fun.
Great. We went to Lauren's dad's and and his wife's, and is in McGee, Mississippi. And if you don't know where McGee, Mississippi is, it's the way I explain it to people is that it is like you get off the interstate on like to a county road, then you get off the county road onto a like small town road, and then you get off another road and then you start to get into McGee. And so it was really interesting. This is the first time that our kids have noticed this. So like when you get off the interstate, you start, the further you get away from the interstate, you probably into a poorer community. And so our kids just noticed like every house is a mobile home, right, as we're driving through. And so it's the first time our kids have ever like noticed like, and Claire's like, why are there just rundown boats everywhere? She's like, because they're just boats, like overgrown and cars overgrown, and you're just like, well, I'm not real sure, but and so, so then you get into my father-in-law's neighborhood, and it is super nice houses, Like, but it is literally like you drive through, you hit a stop sign, and then about, 500 yards later, it's like, it turns into, oh, these people had land and built on this land, and and so then, like, their eyes are like, why are all these houses so big? And so it was a really, really interesting conversation of just that dynamic. Like, you forget, like, I think where we are, I grew up in Alabama. My parents grew up in Russellville, Alabama, which is North Alabama, and it is kind of that same thing where you get off of a road to get off of a road to get on. The interstate doesn't really run through, and so, like, I had seen that because my parents always took us back. They did the parent thing where they're like, oh, this is where the Frosty King was, and this is where you're like, what's a Frosty King? Like, and here's the main strip of, where those old kind of downtowns. And so for us to have that conversation of, like, it was a kind of an economic conversation with our kids of, okay, well, here's why these people live, here, and this is why their house looks like that, as opposed to grand's house that looks, like a super nice house. And so, so that was an interesting thing for us in the car as we had philosophical, economic conversations. And so, anybody else?
We do a thing called Turkey Palooza. It's on a cold sector, everyone fries turkeys. We've been doing it for I don't know how many years, 8, 10.
It's just in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Neighborhood. So this year, hanging out, and it's interesting. People have grown up, kids have left. And all these things.
Mm-hmm.
One of the gentlemen who lives down there, his son became a woman, and so he lives in Colorado now. And he brought his, I guess it's his wife. I don't know if they're married. Who's also a man who became a woman. So they're both women now. And they
All right.
both came there. So we hung out I hung out with them for at least an hour, talking to them a bunch, which is not my normal.
Mhm. Yeah,
hang out
normal
with.
crowd.
Yeah. So I mean, it was interesting.
Yeah.
We sat and talked. And they had both heading to Peru, gonna go biking, and but it definitely was not like my normal crowd because we also had one other person that was there who was anti meat.
She's
Vegan. She was like over the top. Like she brought a soy loaf thing or something to fry
She's a
it.
big tofu loaf.
Tofu, which did not work, but anything like that. Like she showed up and was like, "I'm gonna fry this because I don't believe in killing animals to eat." And I'm like, "Oh wow! Like, why are you doing?"
You're at Turkey Fry.
Yeah. So she made them pour out. She made them pour out all the oil so she could fry her loaf because she didn't. And then,
She wanted to eat turkey.
correct. And then when it came out, they were gonna check the temperature, and she wouldn't allow them to use a thermometer because it had touched meat and stuff. And I was like, "Wow."
All right.
It's
Like,
diverse.
There you go.
it's different than what it used to be.
No,
So yeah.
In Brentwood.
Yes.
I know it's kind of cliche. It's like the old, I forget, was it Kevin Costner, where he talks about like how many moles and voles and mice and animals that you kill by tilling the land to grow the soy. So it's like, she's got blood on her hands.
Yeah.
You might as well eat the bloody meat. Like,
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. So
Just the fact that the soy loaf sounds disgusting. We
I
won't
mean,
have those next week.
there are Amish who live across the way from Lydia's grandmother's place. And so it's funny, I was reading a book that was talking about the Amish, and I was just kind of observing them. They're an interesting bunch, you know.
Mhm.
They can use like motors, but they can't drive a car, but they can ride in a car. They can use a generator. They can use a generator that will spin a wheel, but not to like move them. It's like these arbitrary set of rules.
Yeah.
And apparently there's a elder who decides whether technology is going to be beneficial for them.
Mm-hmm.
So they have like a group of 3 or 4 that meet and decide if they're going to adopt
Yeah.
or adapt with.
Yeah, with the technology.
Yeah, so it's just interesting. They all seem to be very pleasant, happy people. Just got their sheep and cows.
Yeah.
I want to add on to what Drew's saying because you will find this fascinating. So as you all know, well, most of you know, so Ryan's a NICU doctor, and we'll have an Amish family come in with a sick child for a variety of reasons. But whenever one is really, really bad to an extent that the child may die, the entire community, like I'm not talking like, it'd be like our entire church comes to the hospital
Mhm.
and they make the decision together. Like they don't make the decision, like, I couldn't imagine my child's dying, like, hey Rob, what do you think? You know, should I continue this on? Like, I wouldn't consult. Not, and I love Rob, but I wouldn't consult with Rob or whatever.
A very communal
Yeah. So
society.
how Drew's describing this, like, it's like there's this group that, I mean, they all kind of come in and they're very pleasant, very respectful to Ryan, but you know, it's funny when these things go on, how they're very technology dependent. When a baby's, you know, strapped to a
Yeah.
monitor, that monitor is keeping that baby alive. As you all know, Ryan deals with the worst of the worst. She's, her job in the NICU is the hardest job. So, she has the sickest of sick babies, so it's a lot of tremendously difficult, hard decisions. So, how he's describing that to a T is how she's described the Amish to me, too. So it's a neat thing.
So, I mean, the reason, I think, hopefully this is, I hope you find this stuff, if not beneficial, just at least a little bit eye-opening and like thought-provoking as to like the differences that we have with the people, because I think it's so easy for us, right? I mean, half of us live in Fieldstone, and so, you know, you don't really have to leave Fieldstone at all, except, you know, and even to get groceries, because there's a Publix right there, and a Walgreens, and now a Dairy Queen. So if you want to, you know, and so like it's that thing of like we can get so kind of blinded by all of our life around us that we forget about different cultures and different things, but then also how that affects and how that should, and how the way that we read the Bible and our faith should dictate how we interact and how we live and how we do life with other people. And so hopefully that is, and so we'll put a bow on that kind of next week, I think. And so, all right, so 2 questions this week. We could have some fun conversation around these 2 questions. And so, again, feel free to share your thoughts and opinions. And then, we'll see where it goes. All right, so the first question is, should Christians be advocates for the death penalty? So, you moved real quick. And so this means, all right, so it means nothing. So let's dive in. So I have, no, I'll share that story.
That's the question you say, this is word semantic, but
Uh-huh.
should be advocate. You're saying support the death penalty, or do you mean like, because when I think of advocate, I mean like they're out there, they're trying to push it. Like,
What would the opposite of the death penalty? I mean, advocate be
A detractor?
opponent,
yeah,
detractor.
okay.
So yeah,
should be a supporter of the death penalty or be opposed to the death penalty?
Yeah, should be Christians should support, or maybe can support,
Okay.
can be advocates for the death penalty.
I think it's hard, and I guess I'll start because I'm not bashful, but I think it's, how I've always looked at things like this is, so in God's eyes, no matter if we do the littlest sin or the largest sin, whatever, and largest being the eyes of what we see is the largest and smallest sin, God still sees sin as against him, or, you know, the opposite of him, so regardless. But like, I think about like, I saw in the news last week, there's a Venezuelan gang that's in Chattanooga that just got caught in child sex trafficking. Like, for me, that's like a death penalty. Like, if he went for the death penalty, I wouldn't be like,
No,
that is undeserving. Because for me, to harm a child in that way, I don't think, that'd be like my toughest thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that are tough, but for me, that'd be tough. So I think as a Christian, I'm not sure advocate is the right thing, but like, I wouldn't be against something like that happening to somebody that, whatever in my view would be worth the death penalty.
So you would say you are not opposed to the death penalty?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Under a circumstance.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, okay, this is all like, somebody steals a loaf of bread. We're not talking like Sharia law, like, or whatever. Like, and so this is like in our context of the U.S. with the rules and regulations that we have, that, you know, take it to mean someone is convicted of a crime that would normally be, the death penalty is an option.
I feel like
you know,
we-
Christians should not be, Christians, there shouldn't be a problem with Christians to have that death penalty.
Is there death penalty for pedophilia? Because I feel like it should be, and like it should be televised and public and gruesome,
Mhm.
and we could put a stop to it. You know, feet first into the wood chipper.
Mhm. There you go.
I don't think we have.
I don't think that is a death penalty. I mean, I don't know, the lawyers.
I think
So
that-
yeah, you're saying there are situations in which the death penalty is called for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So like I always grew up very pro-life and very, like believing that the death penalty was appropriate at times. And I lived in Texas and well, and I thought about how like it was part of Jewish culture, like not, but part of their law, like they enacted the death penalty and stuff. And then one day I had a friend say, well, isn't the death penalty kind of the other side of the coin of like, isn't valuing life, like pro-life, like isn't the death penalty kind of the other side of the coin on that?
Hmm.
That made me think, but I don't know, like
Not an answer.
I can't
There
make
isn't.
myself be completely opposed to the death penalty because of those kind of things, but,
Yeah.
When I think we're talking about pro-life, I mean, when I hear that, I think like in terms of abortion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So in terms of abortion, you have an innocent life that is taken without given an opportunity. When we talk about the death penalty and being pro-life, it's like you said, it's someone who's been convicted of a heinous crime against someone else.
Mhm.
And what would be the correct punishment to keep them from doing it again? Because that's the purpose, right, of conviction, is to try to correct, like
Yeah.
correct the behavior or punish the behavior.
like stop someone from taking more innocent.
Yes.
Yes.
You
So-
know,
And
I-
like prevent them from jail
Correct, I was gonna say, I don't know
Yeah.
if killing them means like, if you're in jail the rest of your life, you're not doing the crime either.
Yeah.
I think the idea from a legal standpoint is it deters the theory is it deters others.
Well, and I think that was Drew's
Yeah.
gruesome example, but I think his point
Make
is.
it pay-per-view and give the proceeds
Stop
to
it.
the families of the victims.
But I think the point is, right, if the punishment doesn't fit the crime, then what keeps people from continuing to commit the crime? So, what could you do possibly to stop people? I mean, anyway, not really answering the question, but.
No, I mean, I think those are valid questions.
On top of that, if God is the ultimate judge, who are we to make that decision?
Yeah.
Right, but also then you have to look at the burden on the taxpayer too.
Well, I
mean,
agree,
Yeah.
and that's why, honestly, putting away for life
Yeah.
is
It's way cheaper.
significantly
It's
cheaper.
cheaper, yeah.
I mean-
So y'all see, I y'all followed
Cheaper,
this,
cheaper
and
than
this was,
The appeals
Because of the
process
appeals.
alone.
Yeah.
so
Government lawyers.
so is it El Salvador? Have y'all followed this story? So the president essentially, decided that crime was gonna end in El Salvador. And so essentially what he did was he arrested every member of these gangs, the violent gangs, or I think every gang, and threw them all in a jail together. And so they were, I don't know where it was. If I find the story, I'll send it out. And so like crime has gone down something like tenfold. Because what he did is he essentially rounded up every member of these violent warring crimes, drug crime, if it's drug families or, gang affiliated stuff, and just threw them all in jail and was like, all right, you're not gonna do this anymore. And so it came out, I saw it, I think because, the idea of, I'm sure it had something to do with the election and politics and all that. But he was being interviewed and was like, hey, how did you do this? How could you do this? Like, were you not afraid of retribution? Blah, 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 blah. And so, but essentially he just rounded everybody up, threw them in jail for life. And with zero possibility of parole, no matter if you were the kingpin or if you were a, low level, whatever that is. So, but just something to think about or look about.
Well,
If you're
apparently in jail down in those Central and South American countries, it's up to the families to provide everything for them while they're in prison. Food. So essentially, it is a death sentence if nobody's there to take care of it.
Or supporting money.
So if, I guess so then in my next question is if we believe that there are instances in which the death penalty is warranted, is there a biblical basis for that? Because if the Bible should inform how we live and the Bible informs our political beliefs, right? Not our political beliefs informing what the Bible says. So if that is a conviction or if that is a belief, is there a conversation to have about what the Bible says about that? I mean, I think the first thing everybody would go to was an eye for an eye or whatever, and I
Well, but I mean, in the
think we gotta
Bible,
look deeper.
in the Bible, God places judgment on people and they die.
Well, and
There's certain things.
He has
But
the
I-
death penalty for people, like, you know, like, this person does this, you stone them to death. Like in Jewish, and he never says later, we're not gonna do that anymore.
Like
Like,
he
so, I
says,
mean,
throw the first, he who's without sin throw
Yeah,
the first
throw the
stone.
first
yeah,
Yeah.
there's that.
There's
They
that
didn't
one.
let him do it.
And I'd always understood that to be, like, that was guidance for the Israel as a nation, as its point in time, and not transferred to other non-Gentiles, right?
Right.
Necessarily, so.
I think if you look, yeah, I mean, I think both ways, right? If you're looking at Old Testament law, like, obviously, if you take Old Testament law, there are penalties for certain sins
Well,
that
and
are
what about
death.
the flood?
The flood, yeah, so.
Every single person was wiped out except for those who were on the ark
Mhm.
because of their sinful nature after having opportunity to.
Do that, right? Sodom,
I was
Sodom
thinking
and
Sodom
Gomorrah?
and Gomorrah, yeah.
But
Wiped
that's
everybody
God-
out?
That's God doing stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's.
that's not- that's not-
But that's city, let's just point that out.
But,
Well,
but that's
but
what
I
we're
guess what
saying.
we're
If
talking
God-
about
if
is-
God's- Yeah, I mean,
Hold on,
it's-
Steve.
Well, we're talking about criminals in our society and protecting innocent lives, right? Pedophilia, I think we all would have a very strong stance against that. Like, children are the most innocent among us, so if they're victimized, I don't think do they get the death penalty? I mean, that's a different conversation, but it's like, we agree that people have to be punished
Held accountable,
for
yes.
what they do, and
Sure.
so
I don't think
God
anybody
God
here
is their
disagrees.
ultimate judge, but I mean, there has to be some amount of law and order
Yeah.
within society to keep. So
Yeah,
I mean,
and I don't think we're trying to minimize,
yeah,
right, like that conversation, because obviously, like, yes, I mean, the reason why we all don't, just go to, the reason why we have insurance or the reason why we pay the copays is because we're all not running to Walgreens and holding up Walgreens to get amoxicillin for our kids when they need it, right? And so yeah, there are punishments that in order to deter anarchy.
And I guess
or
we
mass
use
chaos.
God as, when God has done that broadly, when cities fall or with that was his judgment. So it's like, how do we know if his judgment would be the death of someone?
Exactly.
I don't know that we know, because he's so merciful. As much as he's a judge, he also is merciful.
There's mercy, yeah.
And he talks
yeah.
about David, King David being after his own heart. Well, he, murdered.
David should have died multiple times.
You know what I mean?
By
So,
Jewish law,
yeah.
other than the fact that he was a king. But
Yeah, so it's really tricky, but I think in our society to protect innocent people, it seems hard to say that we shouldn't imprison, maybe not die, but then how do you take care of them? That's interesting about hearing about other countries, that it's like, well, if your family comes and brings you food and clothing, you can have that in jail.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's just a place for you to rest your head.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
That's an interesting, because I have no idea what our government pays, but it's an unreal amount of money
Mhm.
to put people up who, anyway.
What if and actually, I'm gonna say something that's gonna sound like I'm opposed to the death penalty, and I'm actually not, but I mean, if somebody, let's say you're on death row and you're supposed to be there 15 years, I don't know, make up the time period, it takes 15 years, okay, or 20 years. If in reality they had stayed on death row or stayed in prison 10 more years, they would have accepted Christ. Like, part of me thinks when we execute people, you're cutting off their natural lifespan. If the idea is you want them to have as much time as possible, even Jeffrey Dahmer supposedly accepted Christ, right? You want people to accept Christ. I don't think there's anybody that I think of that think, well, he's a prison for pedophilia, he shouldn't have the opportunity to accept Christ. He should just burn in hell. I'd like to say that, but in reality, I don't think that's how God looks at it. So if he has to rot in jail for 25 years till he comes around and accepts, or has the opportunity, I don't know. I feel kind of convicted, like if we cut off those opportunities because we just want to execute the person.
Yeah.
Even though I'm actually for the death penalty, but
Yeah, it's very,
But,
it's
yeah,
very
I just-
conflicting.
Yeah, and I think that's so this came up as when I was I think in my 20s and was wrestling with different stuff and was having a conversation with my parents who are uber conservative and uber conservative in all aspects of life. And so but I just remember being like, I don't know if it's biblical for us to support the death penalty. And my mom's like, well, wouldn't if it was because it was right after Ann Claire was born, and so over 10 years ago, she was like, well, wouldn't if somebody came and raped and murdered Lauren and Ann Claire, wouldn't you want them to die? and I was like, well, of course I would want them to die.
That's why they don't put you.
But yeah, exactly. But also I'm like, but I don't know if Jesus wants them to die, And I'm not saying I'm not saying yes or no to that, but I'm saying that was what the wrestle was within me. Is I was like, well, sure, like I'd want them beheaded on live TV with me smoking a cigar over them, because that would maybe give me some sort of justice or feeling. But also, like, I was like, when I read the Bible, I don't know if that's what I'm supposed to feel, for that. And so, like, there was this, like, war in me, and this goes back and forth, like, like you said, because there are situations in when I'm like, no, that person deserves to die, like, but then also I'm like, but then, and I think that's this God in his mercy God being like, yeah, so you do too, and it's like, but I didn't do that, like, you know what I mean? And so, but it's that I still don't know where to fall on this most of the time. But this is what I think about it, and then we'll move on to the next question unless somebody else has something. But if we're gonna be pro-life, it's a conversation that we have to have. Like, I don't think we can just carte blanche say, I don't think we can carte blanche say the death penalty is a great thing. We need to keep it. Because when we look at the Bible and we say that God wants us to be I think God is pro-life. And that sounds like a political thing, but that's not what I mean. I think also, like, God, if it gets back to all of us being image bearers, right? And it gets back to there's nothing that we can do that can take that image bearership away from us, then even that person who does the most vile and heinous thing that we could possibly think of is still an image bearer of God. Then how do we have to treat that person knowing that? And how do we have to interact, and what should our philosophy be on how to do that? And so I don't know the answer, I don't have an answer, like, but I think it's a conversation that we have to have instead of just kind of, in my mind, just accepting it because it's always been accepted by Christians, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Can I offer an opposing view?
I would love that.
Y'all don't hate me or anything, but I am adamantly opposed to the death penalty in all circumstances.
Right. Can't believe you.
This is my personal belief, right? I've spent a lot of time wrestling with it. I grew up in a home where that was not an acceptable viewpoint. And I wrestled with a lot of the same things, and for me, came back to Genesis. If this person is made in the image and likeness of God, then it is not my decision to make. And I am no better than the Jews who crucified Jesus if I am crucifying this person that is made in the image and likeness of God.
Yeah.
So, it's not my decision to make.
Yeah.
And for me, being pro-life has been moved to 2. And that's it.
Yeah.
Everything in between. If it can't fall within those categories, then it's not for me.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, I'm comfortable with other people's viewpoints too, but like, I felt like when you were talking about it, it resonated very well with kind of
Yeah.
where I landed on it for me is, nope.
But on the same token though, like if there's an active shooter scenario, like,
Yes.
and I have the means to end that, I will absolutely do whatever
Sure.
is necessary to protect the lives of innocents.
Yeah.
So I would advocate for the death penalty of that person in that moment, like by my own hand, if that's what it took.
But
Yes.
that's
That's
different,
different.
because you're protecting yourself
And everybody
and
else.
everybody else.
Well, I mean, broad rip though, if you put a rapist and a murderer behind bars, you are protecting everybody else. In the same, if you kill that rapist and murderer with the death penalty, you are protecting everybody else. It's just
Yeah.
more slow process.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point on the other side of the coin, where you're like, aren't we doing that same thing by doing this, by making sure this person never has a chance to do this again, by, making sure ultimately that they are able to do this, like, they're not gonna be able to escape, they're not gonna be able to have some, panel of parole or some other, change in leadership of the judicial system or whatever come along and say, hey. And so, I mean, I think that is a valid flip of the coin on the other side of that, where, yeah, it's just that there's a tension there, right? And for a lot of us, we don't like, I think we would much rather there be no tension in the Christian life, right? But there's a tension in the Christian life where, we have to be okay having that conversation and having those questions, which gets into the next question, which,
While you're going to that next question, I did want to say, I just want to say that it's totally okay to have a different opinion than other people. And I hope that you don't feel that because
Matt says it's okay.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that.
I'm being serious, like, he can joke about this, like,
Well-
it's totally okay, like, if you say something I'm vehemently opposed, I'm not gonna look at you and be like, I hate your guts.
I appreciate that.
Jump off a cliff.
I don't like conflict. And
Yeah.
And then for you to jump in, I'm like,
Yeah, but I just mean that from the standpoint of, I hope that you're comfortable enough that inside these walls, like, we take pride in our church, we take pride in these
Yeah.
things, like, we want you to feel comfortable.
Well, the Phillips have 4 kids, so just imagine 20 years from now when they're all grown. And the 4 different opinions that are gonna be at the Thanksgiving dinner
It's gonna be an
table.
interesting-
Yeah, Thanksgiving's gonna be fantastic for you guys.
So I wanted to say that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, man. All right, so, thought this would be a fun one too. So, is there such thing as a just war, or a righteous war, or is there such thing? Does everybody know what I'm talking about when I say just war?
Well, I mean, I think when you think about like World War II, like
Correct.
the genocide of the Jews, like, we had to do something.
And
Like, I
genocide
think we
of
had to do something.
There were lots of other groups being.
Yes,
murdered,
other
too.
groups too, yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. Lots of other groups.
Well, help me
Yes.
on my history, but I don't necessarily know that we got in because of what was going on with Jewish people in Germany.
No,
We
we
got in
didn't.
because,
Yeah.
but we
Waited
got
a
in
long
because
time
of
if we
what
did.
happened
In
in.
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, help me on my history. I'm pretty sure it was
You're right.
mainly from Pearl Harbor. It was like,
Yes.
so I guess just would have been.
You get into a bunch of conspiracies on that.
Well, I don't know. I'm not a history buff. I was just saying, is there such thing as a just war? My definition of just would be in defense. Like, we needed to protect, if you gotta protect ourselves, is that just? And I would say, in that situation, we gotta protect ourselves.
Does everybody know what I mean when I say just war?
Can you
Like the
spell it
just
out?
war theory, yeah.
Was
So-
that close on that?
Yeah, you're.
I feel like there's more to it than I would define.
Alright, let me see if this will come up. So, can y'all see that?
Yeah.
Sort of?
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm a little.
You were ready for the question.
I was ready. Alright, so, just war theory is the kind of, when you hear this term, this is, so, I was trying to find the speech, but Bush, George W. Bush, when he started talking about after September 11th, when he started talking about the war on terror, he said it was a just and he used, you guys might remember, he used either divine or righteous, like a divine or righteous calling on the U.S. to enter into this war, and so he invoked kind of he invoked God as a reason for entering into war. So when you talk about just war, you're talking about this. It's an ethical framework used to determine when it's permissible to go to war. Originated with Catholic theologians Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, though it's kind of gone a variety of different forms at the time. So there are three different components of it, and you Latin buffs. Jus ad bellum.
Can you zoom in some more?
Do what?
Can you
Yeah,
zoom in?
I'll zoom in.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the question is it for a just cause? And so when you talk about World War II, that would be the mass slaughtering of innocents. That would be then this requires war to be used only in response to serious wrongs. And so is it with the right intention? So you're essentially not getting into a war to overthrow a political enemy in order to, is it from legitimate authority that only people in recognized political authority can declare war? And then is it kind of the last resort? You've tried everything else. So that's the first part of it. The second part is jus in bello. Does Latin have a J? Is jus? People who deal with Latin all the time. And so that is the ethical principles that govern the way combatants conduct themselves in a theater of war. And so you're talking about ways that you treat prisoners of war. You can think of Geneva Convention stuff a lot, and that is what kind of comes up. Proportionality, no unethical means. Following orders is not a defense. So you can't just say, I was just following orders, so this is why I killed everybody in this village. And then last, jus post bello. Once the war is completed, steps are necessary to transition from a state of war to a state of peace. The way things were before the war, punishment for war crimes, compensation for victim, and peace treaties, which you see if you go back and if you want to do a real nice study of that, I think you can probably go and look at when World War II ended and all the conventions and treaties that happened after that. So the question is that is there a I feel like it's too simple to say should Christians be pacifists, but like is there do we have biblical standing to support war? Sure, that's a good way maybe to say it. Because I'll say it this way: both my grandfathers, one of them was in the Army, one of them was in the Navy. I'm sure that's a lot of our stories. Some of us may have family members right now that are active duty people, and so we are now kind of in that generation where, unless really when Gulf War happened, I was in high school, middle school, high school, so we wouldn't have served in the Gulf War. So really, unless you served in the War on Terror, like you wouldn't have been a part of a war, unlike our parents' or grandparents' generations, where pretty much everyone had served in a war at some point. And so now we have this conversation opening up of, all right, well, what does that look like for us as a nation? But then also, what does that look like for us as believers? And how do you balance out that? Thoughts?
Like, I guess since World War II, my question would be like, what have we gained from any of the war that we've been in? Because I can't name like really much of anything.
Yeah.
The whole Dick Cheney and Halliburton and the military-industrial complex and Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, like these people are just profiteering like crazy over the death of innocents, and it's like, well, what are we gaining, or what have we gained? Now, is there a such thing as a just war? I presume there is, but I don't think we've fought one in the last 80 years or whatever.
Would we say that in your mind was World War II maybe the last just war? With the War on Terror after what?
I would say the War on Terror was actually
9/11.
maybe the last war,
Yeah,
because we were attacked.
And so there was a
just cause for us to defend ourselves.
There could be an answer to this question, yes, and in hindsight 2020, strategically, tactically, how we went about it,
Yeah.
maybe we could have and should have done things differently.
Yeah.
Both of those can be true.
But if you go back and you look at Vietnam or Korea, those were for political reasons. like even the Gulf War, the original Gulf War
And
was
it could've-
for assets and control.
Or I was gonna say, it could have started for good
Exactly.
reasons and
Right.
then actually
Turned
turned into
into-
a,
Turned into
not
something else.
just war. See, Bob McNamara starting to do.
I struggle with this a lot too, and I don't have an answer for this, but like, I feel like when is just war theory kick in? Meaning, I don't have an answer, so this is just a question, but like with Russia and Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
there's always the defense of, well, this is the first step, and then there's more, and then there's, you know, it starts here and then it expands.
Yeah.
And so
If they get Ukraine, they're going after Germany or whatever.
Mhm.
Is that what you mean? Like,
Yeah, and I think we all, I mean, I think that, I would agree with what you said, Tim, but I think that there's a lot of like, those examples where you look at those wars and you're like, do people get into those wars perceiving at the time that they're stopping it early?
mm-hmm.
That they have those motivations, they're looking at this and they're reading it and they're saying, this is why I'm doing it at the time, and then later we get to kind of have the review of it and go, well, you did that for the wrong reasons and you did it too early and you didn't do the right thing. I don't know the answer to that, but I feel like it's, when is it too late to get in too? Like, you know, there's
Yeah.
that conversation, I think, on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
Those are
also
crazy.
the, to me, like, I'm never gonna pick if we go to war or not, you know, like, that is just gonna be done. And I'm gonna have to just pray for our families, you
Mhm.
know, like, that are out there, you know, like, it's a hard thing, and I will always, you know, respect our soldiers.
Absolutely, yeah.
And,
Mhm.
so it's an interesting thing, that I feel like, I think about that, but I'm like, it is never my call, like, for me personally. I can give an opinion, but I am never part of that decision.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if you think back to our parents and grandparents, they were drafted. The draft was active then.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, for me personally, after we were attacked on 9/11, you and I are roughly the same age. I think most of us are about there. I was very close to enlisting.
Yep.
Because I felt personally attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Now I didn't, but I knew a lot of people who
Yeah.
did. So
My mom was freaking out about the like them implementing some sort of draft. They were like, she was like, I think I was a junior in college. She was like, you need to stay for like 6 more years, like in college. I'm like, why? She's like, so you're not drafted, so you don't have, or so you don't have to go, or you can, I guess, do whatever. Like you can opt out or whatever. Like so.
Well, it's interesting, cause I mean, to me, it's like, are we justified in war? You know, like that's how I hear, like a just war, but, you know, just talking about what would we do in an active shooter situation, or what do we think about the death penalty? There's no way in a war to isolate those being killed as only those who perpetrate evil against innocent people.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how many innocent lives are taken, and at what reward? I don't think we could ever know the damage that's done for the good that happens. Like
Yeah.
I was actually just reading, I was trying to find what you were talking about with George W. Bush,
Uh-huh.
and I was reading this like speech transcript of, and it's really it was very well written.
Yeah.
But you know, he talks about like Muslims who live in our country peaceably and like what they believe in. Like this is not, you know, this does not represent any God
Yeah.
or any group. This is an extreme group, and we have to respond, you know, and of course as a political leader of a great country, I mean, he had to do some sort of call to action. But it's like, was it successful? Who was I mean, it was not only the terrorists personally isolated and hurt in that war, and that war went on forever.
And how many soldiers committed suicide when they got
Coming
home?
out. Yeah.
You know, like we had soldier friends whose husbands, you know, some like, you know, gun strapped to their back, knocking on doors, looking for terrorists. Some just went, you know, they were mechanics or
Mm-hmm.
flew helicopter. But you know, it's just, I don't know. It's just a really interesting, because I mean, as a country, I don't think that can happen. And you just say, this is a really like, what would he have said? What would the president have said? This
Yeah.
is just really unfortunate.
We can't do it.
there's
Yeah,
nothing we
just-
can
yeah.
do because it's not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And we don't want to hurt innocent lives, so we're just going to grin and bear it. Do you know, like, what was the right thing? I don't know. It's really
Yeah.
an interesting.
Well, and if you go back, if you're bored tonight and can't go to sleep, like if you look at really like how World War II ended, right, is that the only way for World War II to end was like the essentially utter like annihilation of Germany itself, right? And so I mean that's when you get into, I mean then it was, you know, what after that 50 years of East and West Germany and like U.S. friendly versus not U.S. and like, but then also like the utter kind of disdain that a lot of people in West East Germany or East Europe had for the U.S. because of how it ended. Like I mean because of like it was essentially like, hey, we're gonna because of this we're gonna ultimately destroy your country, like, and it's gonna take you forever to build. And then you see I think the Middle East now is there's a lot of resentment to the U.S. from that first Gulf War, right? And then even from the War on Terror too, of like, you know, what are you doing like in that side of things? Like, why are you here type of stuff. And so
It's interesting. In his speech, he called out, he was like, hey, here's a website. Like, you need to report people.
Yeah.
Like, we are not after you. We are not after the innocent. We are
I remember
after
that, yeah, 'cause
this specific group. Turn them in, make them known. Let it, you know.
And it was the first kind
So
of,
it's-
I think, because I read something too, and it was the first kind of time that they ever froze assets of countries that were like, where they had them in US controlled banks or whatever. And he created the kind of task force where they were like, if we find that if you fund terrorists, we're freezing all your assets, you're gonna lose all your money. And so that was kind of one of the first steps that he took,
Yeah.
or that they took.
It's interesting to read that and then see all the things that have happened, right? Like somebody said, hindsight. It's like, well, what should you do in that moment where you need to act in
Yeah.
some strong seeming way?
It's really, really
Versus
interesting.
what's
It's
helpful.
if you're into politics a lot. Like if you go and look at the debates between Bush and Gore, right? Bush and Gore then in like 2000 and stuff, and Bush's like kind of philosophy on government, and then look at everything that happened after 9/11. Like it was almost like a complete 180 of how he ran his first campaign, then to what had to happen afterward, or what they perceived what had to happen. Like he turned into a completely different kind of politician in that sense. So that's just
So I think both of these questions, right, we're answering very much as a people and not as right? I feel like it gets in the same thing of, are we ultimately supposed to be the judges, right? I'm for the death penalty. I think there are reasons for war, but I think, right, you need ways to deter people from doing it again. And we try to, in our sense, as people and humans, take that into our own hands. And that's where we go, death penalty or war and that kind of stuff to justify it. Or, right, if we didn't defend our country, what's going to stop someone else from doing that again? And then where are we going to be? As a Christian, is that always the answer? I think probably not, right? But also the world's full of sin and we're not living how we should be living, if that makes sense. We're not supposed to be the ultimate judges. You know, it talks about don't retaliate, right? A lot of times you may not see the final judgment that's had on those who bring whatever against you. You may not see what happens. It may not be an earthly punishment that happens, but God ultimately does punish and is just God. But I think that's hard to just sit back and say, and let that happen. You have to, I feel like in society now, do something to deter just chaos. But because you have so many people that don't believe the same thing. So.
Yeah. I think my point, and we'll close on this, because I think you're exactly right. Like I think the point in questions like these, right, is that we have a lot of, and questions that we've discussed over the past like 5 weeks, is we have a lot of intrinsic beliefs that we just have either accepted because they've always been that way, or have accepted because as a nation we know that things have to happen in a certain way in order to run a nation. And I think what I have been challenged by a lot over the past kind of like 5 years is I think I said it earlier, is that I don't want what I believe politically or what I believe socially to influence how I read the Bible, right? Because it's supposed to be the opposite. How I read the Bible and how I understand the Bible is what should influence what I think politically and socially. And I think the way that I grew up, it was not that way. And I think that's not a knock on my parents or anything. That is just a knock, I think, on probably the way that I lived and where I lived and kind of the bubble that I lived in growing up as a Southern Baptist minister's kid in Birmingham, Alabama, you know, is that it was a lot of the conservatism that was around me, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that then that was, I read that into the Bible as opposed to reading the Bible into a worldview and a kind of political and social kind of doctrine. And so for in this setting is wanting to ask those questions where you're gonna have completely different sides of the coin on a lot of these questions for a lot of variety of reasons. Like, I'm sure this conversation about war would have been completely different if we had had 15 Vietnam vets, you know, in here, or, you know, or people who were active serving military, you know, because they're in it and they were in it, and, you know, and there are times, sometimes when I'm like, man, I look at, you know, in my cynical self, I'm like, man, these guys were sold a bill of goods, you know, like that they had to go and do this because it was what God wanted, or because it was it was a divine thing that was appointed. And then there were other times when I'm like, man, I'm so thankful, obviously, the fact that we're here is because we stand on the shoulders of people who are willing to fight for it. And so I just want us, and I say us as the church, like, to be people who almost get tired of somebody saying we have to believe this without being able to tell me, okay, that's great. Tell me why the Bible tells me I need to believe that. And if you can do that, then I'll look and I'll research. I'll do my own research. But I don't want to just believe it because, you know, somebody tells me to. That's probably the Gen X in me, where I'm like, you know, we'll forget you guys. I'm going to do the opposite. So, all right. Anybody else? Any closing? You can text Schemes if you want to talk more about it later, because I won't respond.
I'll respond.
Yeah, Matt will respond. He's good at it. Again, thank you guys for being here. Look for an email. If you, I know a lot of you aren't going to be, or some of us aren't going to be there. And so thanks for being a part of this. Yeah, thanks for being a part of it. It means a lot that you would take time and do it. Hopefully, I hope it was beneficial. At least, you know, you got to have fun conversations with family and arguments in bed before you fall asleep. So,
Thank you and good luck.
Say thank you for your hard work.
Yeah. All right, thanks guys. We're out of here. 6:02. Thanks, Drew.